Okay, hold on a sec.
We're recording. And
Okay.
then you wanted me to start with the attendance, right?
Well, yeah, let me introduce myself first. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Dan McKiernan, the director at the Division of Marine Fisheries, and welcome to the Shellfish Advisory Panel meeting. I just want to introduce some of the lead DMF staff. I'm not sure how deep we go in terms of the Shellfish staff that usually participate in this, but program leader Jeff Kennedy will be speaking today, as well. Tom Shields, I think Chrissy Pettypass, Jared Silver does a lot of our regulatory work. He's on the call, and Julia Kaplan, whose voice you just heard, is the moderator for today's meeting, and she does a great job for this and also our commission business meetings. So, Julia, at this time, why don't we take attendance for the panel members, and then Jeff, I'll let you introduce some of the other DMF staff who are on the call just as participants. So go ahead, Julia.
Okay, I might have to stop sharing my screen for a minute because it's not letting me get away from, hang on one second. Okay, I believe some might be attendees. So if that's the case, I'd ask that they just raise their hand and I can promote them to a panelist. So we'll start with Steve Kirk. I don't think he's on yet. Monty Rome. Mike Trupiano. No. Anthony Murowski. He's not on yet either. Scott LaPreste. Paul Bagnall. He's here.
Here.
Rob Wallace. I'm not here yet. Alex Hay. Okay. Ron Bergstrom.
Here.
Alan Rencarell. Jonathan Johnson. Amy Croteau. Chris Sherman. And Bill Doyle. Bill Doyle's here. So Dan, I don't know if you want to wait a couple minutes, but it looks like.
Well, I don't think so. The good news is we don't need a quorum for this particular meeting in order to proceed. It is advisory in nature. We have a lot of other folks on here. It is being recorded. So in the name of just sort of full transparency and doing our business, if they come in late, that'll be great. If they don't, they can watch it on the video. And I think there's a lot of members of the public who are interested in these proceedings. So I would like to just go forward with the meeting as constituted now. So welcome, everyone. Just a reminder that this is a voluntary group. It was appointed by 2 former directors to enhance communication between DMF and its stakeholders in an open forum. It was first formed in 2014 and has met periodically over the last 7 years. I do confess and concede that we haven't met for almost 2 years, but believe me, during those past 2 years, it wasn't because Shellfish wasn't on our minds. It was because we were very, very busy with the Mass Shellfish Initiative that included many of the members who are as part of this group and members of the public. The purpose of this advisory panel and its makeup and function came up in many conversations over the past 2 years in the MSI, because there is so much support for having this type of a group. Many stakeholder and DMF staff have really appreciated the transparency and the open forum that gets generated by this kind of an arrangement with stakeholders and DMF and other agencies included. The advisory panel is really designed to share information across a range of shellfish interests. And I like to think of it as kind of airing our clean laundry, allowing us to show the stakeholders and anyone who's interested about the work that we're doing and what the challenges are, and to try to get suggestions for solutions from folks on the front line. It also provides a periodic check-in in advance and after the twice or every 2-year ISSC national meetings, where so much takes place at these conferences that last a full week. And from those meetings, changes to the model ordinance are made. And once those are codified, really the model ordinance becomes enforceable by the FDA. So it's so important to get sort of organized, get stakeholder reaction before and after those meetings take place. Maine developed this kind of a model by having the shellfish industry kind of checking in with the agency in advance of the ISSC meetings. And I think Jeff and I both think that this is a really useful process going forward, especially if some of the members of the industry are willing to invest in the time and the effort to travel to the ISSC meetings. Those who have found it quite valuable. I will say, based on some information Jeff just gave me, that the ISSC meeting was scheduled for this fall, but it has been postponed another year to the following year. So a couple of the issues that are being presented today as part of the Shellfish Advisory Panel's proceedings regarding classification of waters in and around mooring areas, as well as around wastewater treatment plants, challenges that we have to meet to conform with the model ordinance. And failure to comply with the aspects of the model ordinance could result in a shellfish embargo for Massachusetts. That means unable to ship the product across state lines. So it's really in the best interest of the Commonwealth to comply with the regulations, and if necessary, request amendments to those regulations where and when appropriate. I regret that it's been 2 years since we met, because some of the issues that I just mentioned, the mooring areas and the wastewater treatment plant buffer zones, they were really worthy of sharing with the public sooner. But Jeff and the program and I have just been so straight out. Jeff took the program over from Mike Hickey last summer, and I became the director in May of last year. So between the MSI and all the pandemic stuff, we just didn't put a meeting together, but we have the meeting today, and we look forward to sharing this stuff with you. Now an update on the Mass Shellfish Initiative, which is part of the agenda. The MSI strategic plan that's being completed this week calls for the more formal establishment of this advisory panel. And so I'm not sure if there's sort of a waning amount of interest on the part of the people who have been on this in the past, and the fact that we haven't met for 2 years, but we will reconstitute this panel more formally. One of the things that the MSI strategic plan recommends is the panel try to tackle some of the issues that have been identified as challenges by the strategic plan, such as the so-called 208 plan oysters, meaning when municipalities try to mitigate for degrading water quality by planting oysters. Many of the oyster farmers and the wild oyster fishermen have expressed concerns about the fate of those oysters. Do they wind up on the market, and do those kind of programs threaten the markets and collapse prices? So that was a big issue that came up, and we want to address that going forward. Another is the so-called Cutler Bill, which concerned the transfer of aquaculture permits from one aquaculturist to, I guess, the next one, whoever was going to buy the business, and the role the municipality will play in that. And so, what we want to do in those situations is create kind of like white papers where if the legislature were to take that on in the future, they would understand the consequences of that. May not be a pro or con, it may just be a laying out of the statement of the problem, if there is one, and the consequences of whatever outcome the legislature might want to pursue. So I really hope that the legislature would use something like the Shellfish Advisory Panel to kind of air some of these issues in advance so that they could be more educated through the deliberations of this panel going forward. So Julia, if you could show so this is a slide that that DMF is going to recommend be the sort of the makeup of the new Shellfish Advisory Panel, with more formal invitations to AG, to DEP, to DPH, CZM, and then invite the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Commission on Indian Affairs to attend. We know, especially constables know, or especially around Cape Cod, that Native American rights issues can be kind of confusing or sometimes challenging for enforcement officers. And so we would like to include them in our future deliberations. And then 2 members of the General Court Committee on Environment, Natural Resources, and Agriculture. What's the purpose of that, obviously, is if the Shellfish Advisory Panel wants to recommend some kind of a legislative fix, then if you've got 2 members of the legislature, within the panel, you're that much further ahead. And then next slide, and this is the sort of the meat of the makeup. This is similar to what we have now, but it would be more formalized, where I've got 1 representative federal sea grant, 2 seafood dealers, 1 wild harvester, 2 involved with municipally managed wild harvest of shellfish, 3 commercial shellfish aquaculture, 1 recreational harvester of shellfish, and then 2 nominated by the MSOA, and then 1 from our Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission. It's always good to have some crossover with our other oversight panel, and then 1 from an NGO involved with shellfish conservation. So those are the recommendations that we're going to make, but I don't actually need the legislature to sort of execute that in order for us to go forward. We're going to get sort of final feedback tomorrow from the Shellfish, the MSI task force about whether this is a good makeup. If it is, I think we can move forward with this. And if the legislature catches up with us and wants to codify that, then we'll do it. If they pass something different, we can amend the makeup of the panel. But going forward, I think it's going to be important to reconstitute this. Tomorrow is the wrap-up meeting to finalize the strategic plan of the Mass Shellfish Initiative. And this exercise kind of reminded me of my whitewater rafting trip on the Colorado River a couple of years ago. And the trip started out cold. It was sleety. It was pretty turbulent with a lot of whitewater. And by the end of the trip, it was warmer, it was calm, it was a little more predictable. It was less exciting, but it was frankly a little more pleasant. And in my view, the transparency that resulted from the frequent web updates and the unintended consequences of the pandemic, which was Zoom meetings like this one, open to the public and allowed the public, including the skeptics who were not happy with the rollout of the initial MSI, it allowed them to follow the deliberations and really see and hear firsthand all the effort and the integrity that went into the process of developing the reports, but also of the strategic plan at the very end. And tomorrow I'll be giving lots of credit to folks who contributed to this, but because it's a different audience, I just want to say that I want to credit Melissa Sanderson of the Cape Cod Fishermen's Alliance, Steve Kirk of TNC, Chris Scalacci, who used to work for us, who's now up at NOAA, and Scott Soares as the Mass Aquaculture Consultant, John McNally of UMass Boston, Rob O'Leary of the Mass Maritime Academy, and my DMF team led by Jeff, Chrissy, Tom, Shields, Jared, and Julia. These folks did a ton of work on all these documents, and I hope you will read over the final version of the strategic plan, but also the scoping report and the massive assessment report. It's especially detailed, it's informative, and it's a what, and who's who in shellfish. And so the MSI tomorrow will be completing its work, God willing, but we're talking to Melissa earlier today. There are very few comments that have come in because so many folks have followed this process so closely. They've already made most of the comments to the strategic plan. So the MSI will be handing the baton over to DMF in this advisory panel for work in the future. And so I think it's fitting, and your role and the role of whoever we appoint to in the future will become even more prominent as we try to execute that strategic plan. So that's my introductory, my presentation on agenda item number 1, MSI update. I guess I could take a couple of questions if there were any at this time. Julia, are there any hands that are up?
Yep, Ron, you can unmute yourself. Ron Bergstrom?
Yes. Hi. Sorry, I had my unmuted. I think after a couple of 100 Zoom conferences, I get it down, but still some quirks. Dan, on the members of the reconstituted panel, you have 2 members from of municipally managed shellfish harvesting, which would include wild shellfish people, but you have 3 from the aquacultural industry. But I'm curious, I mean, how many commercial shellfish permits do you have in the state that are given out to wild harvesters, as opposed to how many grants there are out there, how many agricultural grants there are? It seems to be an imbalance between the number of grant permit holders and the number of wild fishermen.
That may be true, Ron, but in my view, the production, I mean, $30 million oyster industry is born on the backs of, I guess, around 300 permit holders. We're not looking for representation based on population size of the different permit holders. We're really looking for folks who are going to advise us on a lot of our business going forward. And frankly, as you know, commercial shellfishing is regulated by the municipalities. Right. And it's, DMF regulates aquaculture to a fairly well, but we don't reach into Chatham and regulate the Chatham commercial fishery. That's strictly Chatham's business. So it's always I don't know how we can get it right, but I think that the mixture that we're proposing, just like granted, we don't have great participation today, but going forward, and in the past we have, I think that this is going to be a good mix. And also I would remind everybody that these are going to be open meetings, and if there's a burning issue that isn't terribly burning for the members of this group, it can still be brought to the agency's attention. I mean, DMF in the end is using all this information as advisory, and we get advice every day. Believe me, some good, some not so good, but we're open to any of that. But I just think that this makeup doesn't need to be reflective of the permit holder population.
Rather than, if you say it's representative of the permit holder population, that's different than the production. That's the point I'm trying to make. Are we looking out for the members of the harvesters themselves and the people involved in the industry? Are we looking at it from the total industry as far as production goes?
A combination of both, but tomorrow, actually, this makeup that we've described, could get proposed as legislation. And if you have a different idea about how DMF wants to get advice, I welcome you to do that, to put that together, to the legislature. But I don't want to debate this too much because we have a lot of business on the agenda. Julia, is there anyone else?
I'm not seeing anyone, so
Okay.
I'll stop sharing my screen and Jeff can share his.
All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Kennedy next.
Thanks, Dan. I just, of course, my list of employees just disappeared. Hang on one second, please. We have a lot of Shellfish staff on the call, and I know that I see Story is on, and I know he has to get off in just a couple of minutes, but Story Reed is in charge of our permitting. We have Tom Shields, the New Bedford Regional Supervisor, Chrissy Pettipas, who's our aquaculture coordinator, Greg Sawyer, who's in charge of classification down in New Bedford, Greg Betancourt, an area biologist on the North Shore, Devin Winkler, another area biologist. I saw Melissa Campbell also on the call from New Bedford. I see Brianne Shanks, who is new, is a new bacteriologist in our New Bedford office. There's Kaylee Towns is a new area biologist down in New Bedford as well. I think that's Terry O'Neill, as you all know, down in New Bedford is on the call. So I hope I haven't missed anybody, but you know these people. You can always reach out to them, but they also know how to get a hold of me if ever you need, someone has a question and needs to get a hold of me. We have a couple of issues here, reclassification for NSSP compliance. We're going to talk about wastewater treatment plant buffer zones, and you probably haven't, unless of course you've been listening to commission meeting members, commission meeting advisory commission meetings in the last few months. Let's see, mass aquaculture meetings, MSOA. You probably wouldn't know about buffer zones around wastewater treatment plants, but this has been an issue for quite a long time. We have areas that are impacted. Massachusetts has a lot of wastewater treatment plants that discharge to growing areas, and you have to assess the operation of those wastewater treatment plants. And basically you have to classify based on their, not only their average and their normal typical behavior, but also you have to assume a failure as well as what's going to happen if there's a failure at a wastewater treatment plant, and how is that going to impact your shellfish growing areas. So in the NSSP, they talk about wastewater discharges, and you have to, it stipulates you have to have adjacent waters around the outfall as a prohibited area, a buffer zone, as it were. And you have to consider certain items when you're trying to size that prohibited buffer zone. It's based on average water quality and on failures, so you have to do both. And so there's quite a bit of language in the NSSP about buffer zones around wastewater treatment plants, and you have to have that prohibited zone right around the wastewater treatment plant. But from there, it has to be expanded. It has to have a conditional area. And so many of our areas do not presently have a conditional area surrounding that buffer zone, that closed safety zone. And this is what the NSSP envisions. This is what the conference envisions, is when there's a wastewater treatment plant, it discharges, and within that prohibited zone, it's generally sized to be the time of travel and a minimum dilution of 1,000 to 1. And the idea is that if there's a failure, if there's raw sewage discharging, the treatment plant loses power and it's discharging and all treatment stops, it's just belching raw sewage out. You need to have that prohibited zone that's sufficient to allow you to close the conditional area, the areas that are open beyond that, that closed safety zone. So what FDA recommends and what's in the model ordinance, what's been adopted by the ISSC, is the minimum 1,000 to 1 dilution. So unless you can document that you can have a smaller zone, generally it's what they want to see is they want to see 1,000 to 1 dilution. And that's both a consideration of perhaps a dye study that you've calculated what that 1,000 to 1 dilution is, or it could be just the assumption of what it takes, how much volume of water it takes to get down to a certain level. So you can see the conditional area is that area that is under some kind of failure. What's the ultimate impact of an area? So if raw discharge is going on, how far out does it go? And you can imagine those zones based on the flow of the plant could be quite large. The prohibited area around the MWRA wastewater treatment plant is around 69,000 acres, when that may not even be sufficient. But it's a lot of water out there. So as part of our annual evaluation by FDA, FDA is responsible for evaluating our program for compliance with the NSSP. And they've identified a couple of areas that they want to see changes. And they say we're not in compliance with. So one of them, of course, is the Duxbury, Kingston, Plymouth system. And so we had a dye study. We asked FDA for assistance in a dye study back in June of 2018. The executive summary was provided a year ago, January of 2020. And it's they would like to see some changes in the size of our, at the time, the size of our 1,000-to-1 closed safety zone, as well as they wanted to see a conditional area that went out to 100,000-to-1. So that's quite a change. 1,000-to-1 is your closed safety zone. That's the prohibited area. And 100,000-to-1 is the conditional area. So this is the current classification. We haven't made any changes right now, but you can see the prohibited area, CCB 42.1, and that purple triangle is the location of the Plymouth wastewater treatment plant outfall. The CCB 42, CCB 45, those are areas they're straight approved right now, and but they're potentially within reach of the discharge of the Plymouth wastewater treatment plant. It averages around 1.5, 1.6 million gallons every day. So this is what the what FDA has proposed based on the results of the June 2018 dye study, and that's expanding the prohibited zone a little bit out into the channel and reclassifying Kingston and Duxbury Bays as restricted, as conditionally approved, and conditionally approved A would be essentially Kingston, and conditionally approved area B would be Duxbury. And it would all be based on the operation of the wastewater treatment plant. And you can see also there's an extension of the conditionally approved area out the mouth for a little ways. So those conditions, based on the wastewater treatment plant performance, the areas would close if there was a raw sewage discharge of any volume. The area A would close if there was a settling upset and or a loss of disinfection. Area B would close if there's a settling basin issue or a loss of disinfection. Area B would remain open if there was only a settling issue or a loss of disinfection. So the issue with the settling in the tanks is you want to get as clear effluent as possible before it gets goes through disinfection, before it gets hit with chlorine. And so if there's actually the solids are still in suspension in that effluent, it actually reduces the kill on the bacteria. So so that's the reason for the settling issue. And that's pretty typical on most wastewater treatment plants where we have conditional areas and in wastewater treatment plant management plans. So whether it's on the North Shore, maybe around the Ipswich wastewater treatment plant, Newburyport wastewater treatment plant, Hull, it's Lynn. There's a lot of wastewater treatment plants, and we have those area management plans just to deal with plant upsets. So what are we doing about it? We're doing our own in-house modeling of the study using the study parameters, the flow rates that happen during that study, and the dilution, the concentration, the dye concentrations. But we're trying to employ new information that we're getting from the wastewater treatment plant right now. We're in discussions with the Plymouth wastewater treatment plant operators to find out if there are any changes that could occur with the operations to minimize the risk of discharge, or perhaps mitigate it entirely. So we're collecting additional fecal coliform influent, pre-disinfection, and effluent samples every couple of weeks, just to try to assess what is, how good is the treatment, and is the treatment plant a high-performing plant as we believe it is. We're also analyzing for a viral indicator, MSC, and we're doing the same thing, trying to demonstrate plant performance. We're reviewing historic data as well, going over plant upgrades, recent plant upgrades. There's also been the area has been dredged in the last year, so we're looking at that data and hoping to figure out if perhaps we can, that recommended conditional area is perhaps smaller. And right now, Plymouth is doing a feasibility study for inland groundwater discharge. So ideally, wouldn't that be great if the outfall could be eliminated and all discharge could be handled through their sand beds? And we still don't know if there's a possibility for a transplanting product from say Duxbury Bay or Kingston or Plymouth to a offshore area that's straight approved, if that would be acceptable, because the issue here is if Duxbury, Kingston, and Plymouth are now conditional, that precludes them from being able to ship to the new European Union market. So if we do need to go ahead with a reclassification and downgrade those areas from approved to conditionally approved, there could be, we may be able to move product to an approved area as a relay site. We don't know if that's possible right now, and we need to verify that with FDA, because as we understand, that was not part of the agreement when they reached it with the EU. So that's, we think it's reasonable, but that would need to be investigated by FDA in consultation with the EU. Yep, we've done that. So the other area that right now is of interest and is the North and South Rivers areas, MB5 and MB6. Currently, MB5 and MB6 are classified as conditionally approved seasonally, so they were only open in the winter time. Right now, those areas are closed because FDA is saying that there's not adequate dilution in that estuary system in the North and South River. Same deal as with Plymouth. They haven't yet conducted a dye study, but their modeling indicates that there is not adequate dilution in that system, and that all of the system would fall within that 1,000 to 1 prohibited closed safety zone. So we've requested that we get assistance from FDA to conduct a dye study of the North and South River and the Scituate wastewater treatment plant. So Scituate is a similar situation to Plymouth. Their wastewater treatment plant is 1.2 MGD generally, maybe a little bit more, but it goes into a small estuary, small creek that goes into the North River. So same concerns, same issues there. We just don't have the dye study at this time, so we're waiting to hear on that. But of course, the COVID has certainly upset any plans. we get asked this a lot. Why would we follow these recommendations? Certainly, there's public health concerns. Even if we can justify a smaller sized either closed safety zone or a conditional area, what are the concerns? What about everything that goes into a wastewater treatment plant? What might still come out? So whether it's a chemical or other deleterious substance, we need to be concerned about that. Massachusetts is a signatory to the ISSC, where we have we say we are in compliance with all the regulations in the NSSP, and both the DMF and DPH have adopted the NSSP model ordinance by reference in our regulations. So we're required to maintain those compliance. And certainly, if we were found out of compliance, we could be ultimately our product could be embargoed. So it's a concern, and they wouldn't just focus on one particular area. If we were found in non-compliance, and we statewide, they can embargo all our products. So it wouldn't just be product coming from, say, Plymouth or Duxbury. It would be the entire state. So that's our concern, and that's why we want to. That's one of the reasons why we want to address it. There's a lot of documentation in the NSSP guide, and I can provide you with excerpts I've pulled out of the NSSP that deal exclusively with the wastewater treatment plants and how to classify around those outfalls. So does anyone have any questions right now about that?
I'm not seeing any. Oh, hang on one second.
Yep.
Jamie, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. I'm up in Situate. I have a farm down in Dennis, but luckily we're not on the chopping block with this reclassification issue, wastewater treatment plant issue. I'm very familiar with the North and South Rivers. I take my boys clamming there, and it's very unfortunate what we're going through. But I wanted to switch gears a little bit. We're in the process of trying to start an aquaculture program in outer Cohasset Harbor in Situate waters. And we're concerned about the Cohasset's wastewater treatment plant. And I was wondering what the protocol would be for starting the ball rolling on dilution testing there. Because I've had conversations with Chrissy Pettypaw, and she had mentioned that the proposed site locations for the 8 farms that we intend to put out there might be subject to having to be moved based on a dilution study.
Yeah, it's as you know, Cohasset Harbor, it's a pretty shallow embayment. There's not a lot of water there, not a lot of dilution, and Cohasset is a smaller plant. Thankfully, it's averaging. I think they're permitted for 400,000 gallons a day, but I think they're averaging between 200,000 and 300,000 gallons. So it is smaller than, say, Plymouth or Situate, but it's still, we need to assess that, and that has been mentioned by FDA as an area requiring a dilution analysis. So we've just begun to look at those numbers, but yeah, it's a concern, and for all the same reasons. And it's quite frankly, we're pulled a little thin right now, trying to deal with Plymouth, and then certainly with Situate. It's we don't have a large staff, but we're doing what we can, and we have there. I want to say there's 15 wastewater treatment plants that discharge to active shellfish growing areas. In total, I think we have 24 that are coastal, and we do monitor, but primarily there's about 15. So yeah, those are just 3 of the of the 15 that we have to deal with.
So basically get in line. But so if we have to get our way through a legal fight to prove ownership, that it's owned publicly by the town of Situate, but we are confident that that will happen sometime in the next year, and then we will be applying to the state to start our program up. Right now, that area remains open, unconditionally approved. Is that will it remain that way even if we start the process of placing farms out there? Is that something that's off in the future that it would get closed down, or?
Well, at the current time, we're not moving ahead with approving any aquaculture sites up in that area in Situate. So you're talking on the Situate side of Cohasset Harbor.
Yeah, Outer Cohasset Harbor, Briggs Harbor. I mean, this is
Thank you.
a process that's been underway for 3 years. There's a lot of people that have been very involved with this process. So when the time comes that we were to sort out our legal issues and apply, and our Board of Selectmen were to push forward an application to the Division of Marine Fisheries and the Army Corps of Engineers, are you saying that at this time they will not entertain that application?
Right. Where we need to, it would make no sense to approve and go through the steps needed to approve aquaculture sites in Briggs Harbor, only to have to close the area ultimately. So we need to get a handle on exactly what is needed, what kind of dilution is needed. And right now we're doing the same a study with Cohasset and Situate and Plymouth, where we're taking influent samples, we're taking pre-disinfection samples, and we're taking effluent samples, and we're running those for both fecal coliform and male-specific colophage. So we are gathering data, and we're trying to be able to characterize the plant as to whether or not it's what their log reduction, how well they reduce both bacteria and viruses in the treatment, in the process, as well as can we term them a high performing plant? In which case, if we can, we may be able to reduce the size of a needed closed safety zone.
Okay, one more question just before I let you move on. So does it stand to reason that since it's on your radar, and you guys are beginning to get your legs underneath you with respect to this issue, given that the Plymouth, Kingston, Duxbury, Three Bay area system has been, we're in what, year 3.5 of this whole process, and you've pretty much sorted things out. It shouldn't be 3.5 years from now that Briggs Harbor could be approved, is it?
I think that's a fair assumption. We'll be moving quicker on Briggs Harbor.
Okay,
Yes.
good, thank you.
I'm hoping it will not require a dye study because those are involved affairs, and they can be. It can take a long time to find the funding for them, line up the staff and the equipment, and then plan for them. So those can be very involved. I want to say the Plymouth study was over a year in the planning. So I would hope we don't have to go there. But yeah, if it comes down to that, that could extend that time frame closer to 3 years. So I'm hoping that's not the case.
Okay, thank you, Jeff.
Jeff, you got Chris Sherman with his hands up.
Hi, Chris.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Doing well.
So a couple questions, and it may make sense for me to withhold the rest of my comments until perhaps after we discuss the Morganfield issue as well, regarding ISSC and FDA and the relationship there in particular. So I'll probably do that. And then question on timing. So I was really happy to see that you guys have kind of taken action or doing some studies, to kind of build the data set for the wastewater treatment plant issue in Plymouth, and also looking into the parameters and the actual specifics of operations at that plant. Those are all things that I find, to be lacking in the FDA approach to the reclassification. Given all of the kind of impending action on that front, could you kind of talk about timelines on when rubber will hit the road on you'll actually be considering reclassification, even if on a temporary basis? What's your approach there?
Good question. I wish I had a good answer for you. Certainly, it's been a long road here, and FDA is anxious for us to make progress on this issue, and we are meeting with FDA. So I imagine the speed is gonna pick up, and we'll have to come up with some kind of recommendation and negotiation with FDA very quickly. So I would think that it could be in the next couple of months. It could be in the next 6 months, but I would not say it would be longer than that.
Okay, great. And I think I'm not here to speak on behalf of the entire industry, but certainly have had plenty of dialogue with industry locally in the 3 Bay area there, Duxbury, Kingston, Plymouth, and also at MAA on our trustee meeting last week. And, suffice it to say that industry, or the subsection thereof that I've engaged with is largely in favor of DMF kind of pushing back on FDA. And I think that, again, I think we can talk perhaps more in depth about that after the mooring field issue as well, because they're kind of working in tandem there. And I think as far as it pertains to the wastewater treatment plant in particular, the data set that we've got, the biggest data set at play here is that, this is one of the largest producing embayments for farm shellfish for Massachusetts, which is in turn one of the larger producers in the country. So this is not, a kind of an exercise on paper, for an abstract thing for FDA. So I think in consideration of the kind of decades of successful, safe shellfish sales from the growing areas implicated in the reclassification from the wastewater treatment plant, that's hard to argue with, and particularly kind of holding up one dye study on behalf of FDA to say that that is somehow more significant than the track record, I don't think holds water. And I think, industry's position is that there's almost no tangible public health value to the reclassification. And given the economics at stake, the value of the production in the implicated areas, that absolutely has to be taken into consideration in this scenario, perhaps even more so than it does in others. So, I'll leave my comments there on the wastewater treatment plant, but, in summary, we are very much opposed to reclassification with a particular eye on that EU market, which we all kind of worked very hard to open up. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Chris. I think we probably will want to discuss this further after the mooring area or towards the end. So, but thank you. I appreciate that.
Jeff, Greg has his hand up, and then we have one attendee with their hand up as well. So Greg, you can unmute yourself.
Hi. Just one comment to Jamie, who was talking about the Situate side of Cohasset Harbor. Mike DeMeo came to us, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago anyways, looking about what could be done for aquaculture. So we are looking into it water quality wise. And what's happened in the past is the Cohasset side of Cohasset Harbor has increasingly been having poor water quality to where we have maybe 2 or 3 times had to increase the prohibited area. So that has kind of slowed down from a water quality standpoint, being sure that we can maintain an approved area. Then on top of that, you put the treatment plant. And that's kind of why it's been slowed somewhat. But we have had water quality problems, we think non-treatment plant related, that have caused the Cohasset side to close. So we're just cognizant about not keeping an area approved that may have problems. So we just have to be sure on our end. And like Jeff says, then the plant comes into play. So that's a big variable.
Thanks, Greg.
Okay, the attendee oceanburial@aol.com. You can unmute yourself, and if you could give us a name too, that would be great.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Captain Brad White, and I reside in Marshfield and am from Situate. And I am a licensed charter captain, a business person, and also a recreational shell fisherman. Regarding the North and South River in both Situate and Marshfield, for the last 5 decades, there has never been any commercial commerce or trade or export of shellfish, nor is there planned to be. However, our coveted rivers where we have been recreationally reseeding and shellfishing have been closed because they're following under the umbrella of the commercial new dive studies and everything else. So what I'd like to ask as a citizen, and there are a lot of people like me out there, 200 or 300 stakeholders that have permits to shellfish, and this was unilaterally closed last August, and I've been on it with a number of folks that have been involved with it. We do not sell the shellfish from the North and South rivers. They are not exported. So it's a recreational harvest, but it's falling into a very complicated matrix of future safety for things that haven't happened yet. So I'd like to respectfully request that you reopen those areas because they are not commercial, they are recreational.
Thanks, Brad. We'll take that advice and we'll get back to you.
Great.
Jeff, let's move on to mooring areas.
Okay. So as part of, this was a slide Catherine Ford put together for me. And it really does illustrate at times we can be talking past each other between FDA, DMF, and the ISSC. We're going to talk about the background of why we're doing this, how we're going to map mooring areas, what the mooring area assessment is about, and then reclassifications. Back in almost a year and a half ago now, in October of 2019, the ISSC approved changes to the NSSB that would incorporate a new requirement to map and reclassify mooring areas. So anything that has more than 20 moorings would count as a mooring area. The language talks about having to, if it is defined as a mooring area, it would need to be reclassified as conditionally approved or below. So it couldn't remain as straight approved. A pollution assessment would be required. Certainly boats are a potential source of pollution. And because they're floating over your growing areas, it's a direct source of contamination. If the mooring area is deemed a pollution source, we would need to justify an open status. And then if a pollution source, we have to conduct a dilution analysis to determine if in fact there's impacts to adjacent waters. So we'll apply a dilution calculation, and if it indicates that adjacent waters are negatively impacted, those areas must be closed as well. Areas can be reopened once the boats are pulled for the winter. We need to, the steps in this process is we got to identify, map those mooring areas. We have to complete a mooring area appraisal form in conjunction with the consultation with the local harbor masters and the shellfish constables. We'll consult with municipalities on the classification and status as to how important are these areas. Do they need to remain open during boating season? We'll have to complete that assessment and a determination. We'll finalize the boundaries, and then we'll produce a notice for that new area. And then we need a camp and a mooring area and an MOU ultimately. A camp is a conditional area management plan. So just as we were talking about around a wastewater treatment plant, you need a conditional area management plan. We would need a conditional area management plan around these mooring areas. The way we came about, this is all new to us. It was new to trying to determine how to map mooring areas. So we have three different entry points into this process. We can import any data if there's a GIS layer created by the town of their mooring areas. We'll take that and we'll import it into our database and draw lines around those moorings. We can. That only happened in a couple of towns. Most towns don't have that level of detail, so we've had to go to mapping using Google Earth or Bing Maps to identify those individual moorings, and to actually put down points on those moorings and then draw a line around those mooring areas. The other way is obviously on-site to identify the mooring area boundaries, going out and seeing where those mooring balls or winter sticks are, and then try to define a nice area that's easily definable and clear and easily enforceable. And certainly then we're talking with the constables to try to figure out exactly where the lines might be, what's enforceable for them, finalize those boundaries, and then we can move on. So here's an example. This is up on the North Shore in Essex. And you can see there's Canoa Point, and then above that is Cross Island. And we would, using a map, we would identify those individual moorings. So you can see those red dots. Those are all the moorings we've identified. And we've put those points down in GIS. And then the bottom left, you can see we've identified those groupings of moorings that are under 100 meters. So 100 meters or less clustered together, and more than, well, we want to focus only on those mooring areas that are more than 20 boats or 20 moorings. So you can see it's identified several different mooring areas, but those don't qualify as NSSP defined mooring areas. And then you can see the bottom right, that's what the mooring area looks like. And those are the actual closures we would make. So we have a couple of ways to deal with that. If we can't close off a cove or make an easily defined narrative definition, then we're going to just publish a map with the location of the mooring area. And the reason we're trying to keep it to buoy is so that we don't impact. You can see from that, particularly from the bottom right, that we're trying to avoid intertidal zones on the North Shore. On the North Shore, we have a lot of soft shell clam beds that are in intertidal zones on the mud flats, on the sand flats, and there are large tides, 10-foot tides. The concerns, say, for example, in Duxbury might be different. We want to try to limit those mooring areas to just buoy to buoy and stay away from aquaculture lease sites, for example. So it's a little bit different, the considerations in the different areas. So we'll complete a mooring area appraisal form in conjunction with the harbor master, and we'll go over the mooring location details, the area usage, vessel details, how big the vessels are, what kind of MSDs they have. If there are any services, what are the pump out services there at a local marina? And then are there any local rules and regulations? They could be either, if it's a private mooring area, there may be regulations, or if it's public, there may be town regulations. So the key information here are the actual mooring locations, the size of the vessel on each mooring, the MSD type, and if there's pump out capacity available for that mooring area. The pollution assessment it's required for all NSSP defined mooring areas. And for the determination, it could either be a prohibited area, we could just draw a line around those mooring areas and reclassify it as prohibited. We could classify the area as conditionally approved and closed during the boating season, or we could leave it open during the boating season, but we'll have to demonstrate that the area is well enforced, is well patrolled, and that there's adequate pump out capacity, and that pump out actually happens. So reclassification, once areas are delineated and the pollution assessment is done, they'll be reclassified, and then we'll issue a legal notice. Those notices will be distributed to the harbor masters as well as constables and the normal route. And then, of course, we'll need conditional area management plans and MOUs. The camps, the performance criteria for the camps is that the area will be closed in the boating season. That's the default assumption. And then we have to justify it if we want it to remain open. We're going by historically, when those boats are actually in the water. So that might be it might be a May 1st, it may be an April 15th, it could be a June 1st. And then once those boats are pulled and we get fewer than 20 or fewer boats, then we can reopen an area. When it's open, we need notification of any sewage discharges. If those harbor masters or constables document that a boat discharged, we would need to be notified immediately. And then, of course, we'd run a dilution calculation. MOUs and MOAs, we have to create those for each community to make sure that they are, in fact, enforcing the no discharge zones, the EPA no discharge zones. So under what conditions can an area stay open? So all areas will need to be conditionally approved or below. Area can stay in the open status if there are fewer than 20 boats, 20 or fewer boats. And the model ordinance is pretty vague on this. So I've put in here, it says you need documentation, verification, and enforcement of no discharge zones and locally well enforced no discharge and occupancy regs. There needs to be the availability and documented use of pump out boats or pump out facilities. So that means we're going to have to review pump out logs to make sure that, in fact, that the pump out boats are working and that the pump out facilities are actually taking in volumes. Last year, I think Massachusetts approached 1 million gallons that were pumped through CVA pump out boats. So after the assessment determines the mooring area is not a pollution source and it's documented in the camp, the area can be placed in the open status. So what can we do? What is our potential mitigation? Well, we haven't gone through the process yet, and we will be shortly. FDA will be reviewing our first 6 and 10 areas, priority areas that they've identified. So they'll look at what we've done. They'll determine whether or not our approach is adequate, is valid. And if it's not, we'll have to rethink this. But we're trying to limit impacts and closures. We need to reduce the occupancy and discharge rates of those boats and those mooring areas. So perhaps certainly what we're looking at is eliminating small boats that don't have MSDs from the dilution calculations, because we don't believe they're a source of concern, a pollution source. We need to ensure there's adequate pump outs. Municipal regs, they could regulate overnight occupancy. So they could either prohibit it, or perhaps they have to have a regulation saying that you can only sleep in your boat overnight if you request that permission from the town. And then the town probably would have some kind of requirements for witnessing, securing the Y valve, the through hull fitting. There needs to be fines, or that would be helpful to have additional fines for the discharge of sewage. And then perhaps the town could move moorings away from important open areas. So we're going to be to maximize harvestable areas, municipal and state enforcement of the state and local no discharge zone regulations, And we have to have documentation. So DMF will be reviewing patrol logs and CVA pump out logs as well. It might be good to segregate boats. The municipality might be able to take all their big boats and put them in one area and have small boats in another. That kind of naturally happens in many places just based on draft. You need deeper water for the bigger boats. Certainly I would ask the cities and towns not to license new aquaculture activity in mooring areas or near them or near any point source, and then consider moving moorings away from those open areas. It's all new. We don't know if it's going to be accepted by FDA, so we'll be finding that out at least as a first cut in the next month or two. We might be able to make changes, and I imagine we will submit proposals to modify the model ordinance language for mooring areas. I know other states will as well, and they're talking about creating a guidance document to go along with the model ordinance language. But as Dan said, the October 2021 meeting has been pushed back a year, so it's now another year and a half away. So we're addressing the 10 priority areas first. We've identified those mooring areas and done pollution assessments. Legal notices are complete, and conditional area management plans are under development. So right now we're working to complete this mooring area delineation for all areas for the coming boating season. It's a big ask. It's a lot of work. Greg and his staff and all the North Shore staff is working hard to try to identify those mooring areas and go through all the steps here. As you can see, it's pretty onerous. And I'll stop there. And
I think we have time for a couple of questions. Jeff, let's see anybody raises their hand on this one.
We got 2 attendees. I'll start with Dale Levitt. Dale, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Good job, Jeff. You made it very clear how this is all going to work. And my only question is whether there is going to be some way that a municipality or a stakeholder group could appeal any decisions made in terms of mapping out your mooring areas.
well, I guess the appeal process is kind of in the cooperative nature. We're working with the constables, we're working with the harbor masters. So I'm hoping by front loading this process that we don't really get into any kind of contentious issue where we're going against what the municipality wants. But there may be issues here that we just can't avoid. And we have not set up a formal process for that, Dale. But that's certainly, we should consider it. It's a good point. Are you referring to any particular area, Dale?
No, just a general observation.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, next we have Greg Morris. Greg, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, yes, Greg Morris here from Duxbury. First off, I want to say, thank you guys for all your efforts. I know it hasn't been easy, and but I just want to definitely second what Chris Sherman has stated about our industry here and many of his statements that he said. And as we've said in previous meetings, if a spill occurs, all the areas are going to close anyway. So making Duxbury Bay conditional, I see the point where, Jeff, you are coming from, where they say it's 1 in 1,000 and all that, but we're going to close anyway if there is a spill that occurs. In the delay, that once there's a spill and comes out the pipe, I forget how many hours it is, but it's a pretty long time. Our harbor masters and shellfish wardens, they have us like locked in. We know as soon as there's any kind of accident, anything like that, we know really quick. And there's only a couple landing spots that we land anyway. So if for some crazy reason he can't get a hold of somebody, he knows our truck, he knows who we are. So we wouldn't be bringing the product in. And this has been demonstrated in the past when Plymouth had an accident. and it was not a problem. And we just put the stuff back out on our farm and no biggie. So I think that, that when you talk to the FDA in your proposed plan that you may put together, mention that we have emergency measures in place already, that if there was an accident, that it would be taken care of, concerns would be taken care of, and make it a small conditional area around that. It's good to buy time. I mean, we saw what, A3, I guess, is when it showed up in Duxbury Bay, when it wasn't even there before.
Hey, Greg, this is Dan. I think you're addressing the wastewater treatment plant issues with these comments. And
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was all. I'm sorry.
well, yeah, but I just, we understand your points and so I don't want to cut you off, but
No
we
worries.
wanted to get to this mooring issue and then we get some other business. But,
I got you.
put those concerns in writing to us if we don't get a chance to get back to this. Okay.
Will do. Thanks
All
again.
right, thanks. Yeah.
Thanks, Greg.
Okay, I'll go to Chris Sherman. And then we have two more attendees. So I'll do the panelists and then two more attendees and then we can move on.
So I think that, so a couple questions, Jeff, which are the 10 areas that have been deemed high priority?
Duxbury was one of them.
Yep, no surprise there. And I think that once again, similar to the wastewater treatment plant issue, it gets at a broader conversation about DMF's relationship with ISSC and industry's relationship with ISSC. ISSC was formed for a reason, and that reason was essentially, FDA realizing that their ability to bring the level of nuance and a kind of detailed approach that considers all stakeholders and all facets across the country is kind of an untenable scenario, similar to dairy and some other really kind of high touch food regs. And in my view, and I think this view is shared by a number of other industry people around the country who've been engaged with ISSC for some time, and seemingly is shared by other state authorities who have had to undergo more and more rigorous peer reviews. And FDA is kind of first and foremost not really honoring the spirit of ISSC in their approach. I don't think we need to relitigate the kind of the unfortunate process that landed us in the mooring field debacle that we're in with the reinterpretation and subsequent changes to the MO. I think that alone was kind of grounds for protest on behalf of non-FDA stakeholders at ISSC. However, there's the kind of second aspect of their approach has been to seemingly put a completely undue burden on states and have, knowing that states aren't going to be able to marshal the resources they need to in order to, tackle some of these kind of reinterpretations and new initiatives on behalf of FDA, which are once again completely irrespective of the economic, social, nutrition, environmental value of the industry that they're imperiling through these capricious kind of mandates. So I would argue that this is probably, with these specific issues, the wastewater treatment plant and even more so the mooring field problem, this is an opportunity to push back. I would also say that in the interest of kind of righting the ship on the broader relationship with FDA and ISSC, it is also a good time to push back. And I would advocate probably a two-pronged approach for us, which is to push back on FDA, but also simultaneously be working through MSI, through this panel or the new iteration of this panel to engage with legislators and make sure that the state has the resources it needs to adequately vouchsafe the safety of the industry that has grown and grown and grown, around these embayments that FDA is kind of after. So to be clear, I think pushing back on FDA on this is a good course to take. And I would state for the group that though there is the kind of the boogeyman of the cessation of interstate trade, kind of being blacklisted by FDA, there's a process that has to be gone through in order for Massachusetts to be kind of removed from the ISSL privileges or whatever. And also, it's important to note that they have never actually done it. They've never actually embargoed one state from selling to others. And I think it would be quite a hullabaloo if they did. So again, I don't know that I would be advocating for that strategy if it was just about the mooring fields and the conditional closures and things like that. But it's these poignant issues along with this kind of broader environment that FDA has kind of created over the last few years that I think warrants perhaps a little bit more of a radical approach.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Chris.
Greg, did you have a response to that?
Yeah, just one quick response to Chris is back in January, I went up in the Duxbury Bay area with Jake Emerson, the Shellfish Warden, and we picked out some lines, and it ended up being 3 mooring areas, one down Standish Shores, one off the Harbor Master Office in the Deepwater Basin, and one around it. What we were able to do through the information we had was 2 of those 3 areas are going to stay open year round, so they're not going to hurt anybody. And what we did is we maneuvered one of the open areas so that it included the shoreline. So we were very, very creative on how we did the lines so that shoreline shell fishing could still continue. And we made a very important point of keeping it off the grant areas. So none of the grants were going to be adversely affected. So 2 of the 3 areas stay open year round. The Deepwater Basin stays closed during the mooring area, but it does not affect any aquaculture. Thank you.
Greg, thanks for the insight on that. And certainly we've got, it feels like you guys your head's in the right place on this, and certainly in Duxbury we've got great constables, so I'm sure we can work together to kind of make it work. I think broader point is that we shouldn't have to. We should have a better partner in FDA. But I really do appreciate that.
Now, and everything we do with this mooring areas, we go out with the Shellfish Wardens because we're cooperating with them. They're cooperating with us. We want to make sure it's good for both parties. So the last thing we want to do is close any, tremendous area, and an emphasis on not closing any aquaculture sites. Even if we have to make a starfish type of, polygon around a mooring area, we'll do that like Jeff had talked about, putting a map out with the notice just to protect shorelines or aquaculture or commercial digging.
Glad to hear it.
Thanks, Fred.
Julia, I think we have 4 hands up, so let's take those. We'll cut discussion off at that point. We'll get back to those. Anybody else at the end of the meeting, because we want to get into some of these other issues before 3 o'clock.
Okay. Do you want to go to Ron first?
Please.
Ron Bergstrom?
Sure.
Yeah, hi. Jeff, I'm assuming that Stage Harbor is one of those areas that included in the 10 that you're looking at, or you're all up the North Shore?
Actually, it was not one of those areas, but
Oh,
we are, lucky you, we actually started with Chatham, and Renee was very helpful, and Terry O'Neill worked with Renee.
helpful is a word that you probably chose. I would say she was very a good advocate for our area, and I know her very well. Well, that's good news because, of course, we have a pump out facility. We do not allow liveaboards in Stage Harbor, as far as I know, although that rule can be, enforced sporadically. And also, there's quite a flushing rate there. We're now dredging the harbor, as we do almost on a regular basis, so we got a good flushing rate. Is there any economic, just in talking about some of the other areas, economic impact of these closures, is that taken into account at all? Can we say, well, you're going to lose X millions of dollars if you close an area to shellfishing and so on?
Yeah, that was not part of the NSSP calculation. Typically, when you there is a field when you submit a new proposal. There is a field that asks you about the costs, but as I recall, no dollar figure was inserted into that field. So it's as far as reclassification, around public health requirements.
Yeah,
It's not my experience that that kind of assessment is performed.
I understand that, but as it stands now with the areas that are under that you're looking at, there is essentially they have to prove that they can be open. In other words, it's our obligation to show that it's safe right now.
Yeah.
And as far as pollution goes, obviously gasoline, oil is a consideration. Coliform bacteria is always a consideration. Do you know what exactly they're looking for?
Well, certainly it's sewage. It's discharge from the holding tanks, but it does not stop there. FDA is concerned about gray water. So anything in the bilge, sure.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ron.
Okay, so we'll go to the attendees. I have David Belisig. Sorry if I said that wrong. You can unmute yourself.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'm down in Falmouth. I'm a full-time commercial fisherman, shell fisherman. We have really good resource officers here, and I know they're doing their best. My question though, I don't know if Walkway Bay is one of those high priority areas, and I'm unsure because I do this for a living full-time. I have a mortgage, kids in college. I'm trying to figure out if May 1st, if I'm fishing or looking for another job. And so is the default position that anywhere that has moorings, not just the mooring field, but the body of water, SC15 in this case, is closed until we figure it out? Or is the default position that it's open until we figure it out?
Well, it's open until we figure it out, but we have identified what those moorings are. If it's more than 20, if it's a mooring area that needs to be reclassified as conditionally approved. And then, in consultation with the town, determine whether or not that area needs to be closed for the boating season or left open. So, but I didn't say it in this presentation, but I'm more positive about our approach now than I was, a month ago, 3 months ago, 6 months ago. I think by trying to limit these closures as a mooring to mooring, ball to ball area, I think we've minimized those impacts to adjacent waters. It does not mean you will not be affected. That some people will be affected, some will, and we're running into that already.
I guess because as a practical matter, where we fish on the southern part of Walkway Bay it's about a mile from the mooring area. So just from a practical standpoint, I can understand the concerns, but from a practical standpoint, when you're that far out, you might as well be in the ocean. But
yeah, I think you're probably good. And Greg, do you want to address that briefly?
Very briefly. Dave, that southern end of Walkway Bay, nothing's going to happen there. It's going to probably potentially still to be worked out, but maybe the northwest corner up near the yacht club.
Yep.
The southern end should not have any reclassifications to it.
All right, beautiful.
Right now.
Sure. That's music to my ears. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Sure thing.
Thanks, Dave.
Okay, next we have Jay Butner. If you could give us a first name, you can unmute yourself.
I'll give you a first name, Dr. Joe.
Hey, Jeff.
Okay.
Thank you, Jeff, Dan, and everybody on the committee for hosting this. This is a great forum to get information. Well, can you hear me, Jeff?
Yes.
Okay. Just a personal question here, point of information. Most of what we've been talking about targets specifically oysters, and softshell clams are handled a little differently regarding water quality. How would they be impacted if, the criteria for oysters, would it be applied equally and similarly to softshell clams, or would it be applied differently?
First of all, I think you're referring to mooring area closures.
Correct.
It's all the same. It's all, when we do dilution assessments or dilution calculations, it's all based on water quality. So we're trying to find what acreage, what volume of water, what area needs to be closed to get down to that 14. 14 is our geometric mean, 14 fecal coliform per 100 mils is the limit for an approved area. So that's what we're doing. We're just looking at water quality, not shellfish meats.
Okay,
So it would
thank
be
you.
the same regardless of whether it's oysters or soft shell clams or mussels, anything.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay, next we have Raymond Kane. Ray, you can unmute yourself.
You
He
look like
lowered
you're
his
still
hand.
muted.
He lowered his hand, so I'm gonna come back to him. We'll
Okay.
go to Dan Martino. Dan, you can unmute yourself.
Hey, thank you. I'm just curious what those 10 priority locations are, if you could tell us what those are. Thank you.
I would, let's see, N4 Plum Island Sound, N7 Essex Bay, N9 Annisquam River, Duxbury Bay, Plymouth Harbor, Wellfleet, I believe the Chatham on the south side, Hyannis Harbor, I believe, outer Hyannis Harbor. Where Westport, I believe. Any other areas, Greg?
I think you got them all.
Yeah, Jeff, why don't you post that to the chat later in the meeting, just to,
I will.
yeah, okay.
I will. What we determined was 6 of the 10 areas that were identified by FDA as priority. 4 of those either didn't have didn't qualify as a mooring area. They had fewer than 21 boats in them, or they were already the Vineyard. It was V19 out in Edgartown. That's already seasonally closed. Plymouth Harbor, the mooring area was in the prohibited zone, and I think we had answers for 4 of them anyways. Oh, and Wellfleet was the area was also already seasonally closed that they had identified. So it was just the other 6 areas that needed to be addressed, and we believe we have.
Jeff, that's everyone who had their hand up.
Great.
So we can move on
Okay.
to
Thank
COVID
you.
program updates from Tom.
Good afternoon, everybody. The original agenda item said oyster reefs, but what we're doing for this session is talking about the various COVID relief programs that happened in 2020. And I'm going to be talking about DMF's role in the various programs. And then I've asked Josh Ritzma and Abigail Archer from the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension and Steve Kirk from the TNC to talk specifically about the nuts and bolts of their various programs that they are engaged in. The big item that DMF was engaged in primarily last summer through the fall was managing the Massachusetts CARES Act Fisheries Relief Project. We had a lot of staff involved throughout the whole division who worked tirelessly to process applications and vet them and get the money out. And I think Massachusetts was the first state to get our commercial fishing sector relief money out there compared to other states in the Atlantic. The total project, we allocated $28 million. Aquaculturists got 1.2 million of that. Seafood processors got 13.8 million. Commercial fishermen got $11.8 million. And the for-hire boat sector got $1 million. DMF was also involved in assisting the USDA in administrating their CFAP 2, Coronavirus Food Assistance Program. We provided a list of permit holders and associated landed values for these permit holders to help USDA process and issue relief to commercial fishing sector. Cape Cod Cooperative Extension and Woods Hole Sea Grant Group undertook 2 projects regarding shellfish activities for COVID relief. First which was the oyster purchase for shucked product and donation to food banks. This was primarily undertaken by overseen by the Sea Grant groups and Josh and his team. DMF didn't require any landing or any activities, provide any information or assistance because all the activities was permitted through normal channels by the division. The second project that they undertook was outplanting in municipal recreational shellfishing areas, primarily oysters, but some cohogs as well. Oysters were purchased by 4 Cape towns for planting in recreational areas. All the oysters were purchased were from growers within the same contiguous water body where the oysters were being outplanted in recreational fishing areas. So no pathologies were required. Some oysters were harvested and relayed from closed areas by commercial fishermen to recreational areas under contaminated relay permits. All oyster transfer activities were authorized by DMF using letters of authorization, LOAs, which were issued to agriculturalists and the municipalities for sale and purchase market-sized shellfish. Some cohogs were transplanted from municipal nursery plots in Chatham to recreational areas by commercial fishermen. So those were the activities by the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension Group. The Nature Conservancy and Pew Charitable Trusts undertook a program to purchase oysters from aquaculturalists for restoration purposes. They termed this program Supporting Oyster Aquaculture and Restoration, SOAR, S-O-A-R for short. The program was designed to purchase oysters from farmers and planting them in one of 2 established oyster reefs, one in Nescatucket Bay in Fairhaven, and one reef site in Buttermilk Bay in Bourne. DMF permitted planting of oysters at these 2 identified sites by amending the municipal shellfish propagation permits held by Fairhaven and Bourne. We also issued letters of authorization to growers and the Nature Conservancy for the purchase and sale of market-sized oysters. Because none of these oysters were going into commerce, they're all market size. We had to come up with a way to enable that activity to take place. And additionally, we modified our tagging requirements. Oysters were tagged using bulk tags, or what we term trip records, where all of the oysters within a container, be it a vessel, a truck, or totes, aboard a vessel, were tagged and records were kept in order to streamline the whole relay process. And under this first phase, no pathology testing was required on the initial participants of the program because they were in the same contiguous water body, and that went very smoothly. A second phase was introduced before recently, actually through the winter, where some growers in Buzzards Bay and south of the Cape from Woods Hole to Coit Bay, they were solicited to participate in a project as well. And the only caveat being that if they wanted to participate, they'd have to undergo pathology testing. So DMF worked with the Nature Conservancy and came up with trying to streamline a way to be the most efficient in how to conduct pathology testing to bring oysters from outside of these 2 areas in Fairhaven and Bourne. And we came up with what we called biosecurity zones. We identified clusters of aquaculture, licenses and locations, lease locations, and grouped people together in one biozone. And that way, anybody that was requesting to partake in the program, we work with them, collect pathology tests, and the grouping of oysters from each of the growers within one particular biosecurity zone would be tested together. And if there are any positive tests from any of the oysters or for any of the grass sites from a biozone, then nobody would be allowed to participate. There were 3 growers that were allowed to participate in the program from outside of the original sites, from 2 biosecurity zones, and that went pretty well. Our main concern is the prevalence of dermo in adult oysters, and that proved to be a challenge. Even though a lot of the oysters were tested, came back moderately, light to moderate intensities of dermo. We are zero tolerance, zero policy about prevalence of diseases in oysters was our main driver. So that did provide some obstacles to the program. Then finally, with all of these programs, DMF, particularly the SOAR program, working with Steve Kirk and the TNC, DMF biologists were assisting with the monitoring of the deliveries, pathology sample collection, and data compilation for the pathology test results. So with that, I'll turn it over to Josh or Abigail to talk more specifically about their programs with Cape Cod Cooperative Extension.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I can start. Josh Wrightsma, Fisheries and Aquaculture Specialist with Woods Hole Sea Grant and Cooperative Extension. So as Tom mentioned, we were funded on a project that we applied for late spring to help with basically COVID response to aquaculture related issues. This was earmarked funding for aquaculture that was diverted to sort of COVID response. So seeing the potential for a glut of large oysters last fall, we proposed at that time in the spring to do sort of a 2-part project exploring ways to enhance what towns could do to augment their recreational fisheries with partnering with commercial growers. And this was a smaller portion of the funding, but we worked with 4 towns that applied to work with growers in their specific water bodies to move product to the recreational areas that were being fished pretty heavily. And around 50 growers participated in that program all in total. And, all those oysters were harvested pretty rapidly. And, it's something we've certainly heard from the towns around the Cape Cod and Islands region is that, there was a lot of recreational fishing going on last year. So there seems to be a need to explore that further. And we're considering doing that. There's potential for further funding through Sea Grant to do this again this coming fall. So something to keep your eyes on. And then the second part of the project was evaluating whether some local processing capacity could be developed, at existing shucker packer operations to process oysters within the state to, get them to food banks and feed the need there. There was certainly a lot of need throughout the pandemic for that. And then, also explore some value added options for, a local niche for shucked oyster products. As every fall we've been hearing from growers, there's a little bit of need to move product that really isn't sufficient for the half shell market. So we worked with roughly 4 shucker packers, brought in a little bit of technology to help them get over the hump of opening oysters. They are not easy to open, much harder than clams that most of them were working with. So we worked with them on that, and then purchased oysters from roughly 70 growers and had them shucked, and then evaluated how we were going to get them out to both the food banks and then do some retail trials, which is what Abigail can speak to a little bit now if you're ready, Abigail.
Yep.
Sounds good. Thanks, Josh. Hi, everyone. Abigail Archer, Fisheries and Aquaculture Specialist with Barnstable County, Cape Cod Cooperative Extension, and Woods Hole Sea Grant. So we got about 1,800 pints of frozen shucked oysters to Greater Boston Food Bank with the project that Josh described. And when we first started this project, we thought we were going to be looking at further value added, like putting that into stew form or something. Benita Elke, our colleague at Mass Department of Agriculture Resources, was a tremendous resource, continues to be in this whole process. And she put us in touch with Ned Armsby at Greater Boston Food Bank. And they said, you know what, let's just try straight up shucked oysters and see how folks respond. And people responded wonderfully. So the Greater Boston Food Bank kept asking us, you know, do you have more? So we definitely established that they are well received. And then based on this project, Mass Aquaculture Association was able to bring in some more funding to basically do the same thing. So they got it out to more food banks. And in Barnstable County, we got about 1,500 additional pints out to 24 different food banks and soup kitchens just in Barnstable County. And then we just sent a batch over to Worcester County as well. So the next step, so we know that food banks, that they are enjoying this like special product and to have local seafood protein for their clients. We also worked with our nutrition staff at Cape Cod Cooperative Extension to come up with a series of recipes that used simple ingredients, you know, that you could also find at a food bank. And those have been well received as well. I'll put those in the chat. Next step, so we know if there's subsidies available to get more product to food banks, that we can do that. We've figured out the logistics now. That was no small task. Now the question is it a viable business for Massachusetts businesses? And so we're working with Dr. Nora Barnes at UMass Dartmouth Center for Marketing Research and her partner Shannon. And we are going to do a small scale retail trial of shucked oysters at Max Seafood in Wellfleet, Fisherman's View and Sandwich, and Mulaney's Fish in Situate and Cohasset. So people will get a free half pint of shucked oysters in exchange for the promise that they will fill out their survey, and we'll hound them until they do. And then we'll try and get a sense of price points and how people are using them and how they could be marketed. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Abigail. That was really interesting. Are there any questions for Abigail or Josh or Tom?
We've also got Steve Kirk coming up next.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
I'm not seeing any hands, so we can move on to Steve.
Yeah, sorry, Steve. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I had a presentation together for the. You guys seeing my screen? I don't think so.
Yep.
Oh, okay, cool. I put this together for an MSOA meeting, so I ripped it from that. Tom set up my name's Steve Kirk. I'm with TNC. I run our coastal program here in Massachusetts. Tom set up the SOAR program, background well. It's a program that is touching down here in Massachusetts, but also 7 other states. There are some numbers here for the New England area. We were able to purchase oysters from growers, plant them on restoration sites. The overall program so far, which really hit the ground in October, we purchased from 100 growers nationally, 2.4 million oysters, about $1 million in sales. For Massachusetts, you can see it's around 175,000 pieces. It was about 80,000. Yeah, that's right, 80,000 in sales, and there were some additional funds that were used for transplanting, and basically we contracted with growers to help us do the work. The price was set at 45 cents a piece. That was really working with industry, MAA, and East Coast Shellfish Growers Association, working in those 2 locations in Fairhaven and Bourne. Those sites were the receiving restoration sites, because those are ones that TNC had established working with those towns in previous years. So they were sort of already permitted and set up as restoration sites. Tom mentioned, the sort of eligibility to participate. We were, we worked a lot with DMF on what would be allowed in terms of relaying big oysters around, and we were certainly intending to be cautious and working with DMF such that we wouldn't be, this program wouldn't be the cause of spreading shellfish disease, not only from the pathogen relay, but any other unintended relays, transfers that go along with moving animals around. So the biosecurity concern was real, it's warranted, and it limited participation. We had a sort of broad area of Buzzards Bay towns that would feed restoration projects in Buzzards Bay. There are somewhere on the order of like 25 growers that would be eligible, expressed interest. We did 17 pathology samples, sent them out to the lab for analysis. Ultimately, most of those growers were knocked out of eligibility, largely because of dermo, and 8 growers participated. So that all happened like November, December. We will basically working with the same growers because there's some amount of funding left over, in essence, give those growers another bite at the apple to participate again. That'll happen in some cases, next month. And there may be some others later in the spring, but I think it sort of shows that there was a big need for this, all these different programs, and this one I think was meaningful to those who were able to participate, which is great. And there were a lot more interested that could not participate. So that's, I think, an unfortunate reality. I wanted to make this group aware that the funding for this program, there are sort of 2 elements to it. One is the purchase program, which I was just talking about. The other, which I'm surprised I haven't seen in my inbox today, we're supposed to be releasing RFP for what I think is called the Resiliency Fund, but basically it's a funding opportunity that has 2 different tracks. I think it's supposed to go live today. One of the tracks is sort of intended to for growers to make use of, beyond just those who are able to participate and get oysters off their leases and into restoration sites, but also being, in the nature of a COVID relief response. The other is this other track of bigger and sort of more systemic project ideas that are, I think, a bit more geared toward institutions, universities, that sort of thing. And, understanding that COVID and the pandemic was really impactful to the industry, there were a lot of underlying issues that I think COVID basically, poured gas on and exacerbated. There's a opportunity here to try to get some more funding into growers' hands for things like, whether it's a piece of equipment for your business, sort of smaller track awards on the order of $15,000, $20,000, and then this institutional track is set to be a little bit longer time horizon, a bit more money, more like $100,000 awards, to give you a sense of scale and where this is going to be distributed. It's a national program. There'll be something like 8 to 10 of the small awards that touch the East Coast in total, and probably 1, maybe 2 of the institutional track, the bigger ones on the East Coast. So it's not a ton, but it's something. And so I'm hoping to use the email list for for MAA, for for DMF to help distribute the RFP once I get it, which again, I hope is today. Some of the things that, I think are sort of priority areas are thinking about how to build resilience into the industry, and whether that's, from our perspective, we're an environmental NGO, trying to think about restoration market as a diversification tool for the industry. Is there a way to sort of build some staying power into this idea of buying ugly oysters, or sort of having a different track for aquaculture businesses to be feeding the restoration market is sort of one example of what I'm talking about. I have my contact information, so glad to follow up with you all. One of the things that we make the growers do when they're participating in the program is fill out a survey on the at the beginning and at the end. One of the questions is like, are you interested in participating in something like this going forward? Overwhelmingly, growers are supportive. I have a number, 92% of those are like very interested in this type of model. Those are the ones, obviously the respondents are people who have participated. I might just make a passing note too, that there's been some conversations, Chris Sherman mentioned, MSI trying to identify funding opportunities and, supporting DMF. Another conversation that's been happening is with USDA and the NRCS arm, supporting the aquaculture industry, perhaps for a model like this. And those guys have like real money, like farm bill stuff, source and size of money, and are interested in supporting this too. So that's what I have now, and glad to take a question. I also have to leave for a 3 o'clock meeting, but thanks.
Thanks, Steve.
I'm
Any
not
questions?
seeing any hands.
Okay, thanks, Steve. That was a great presentation. And Josh and Abby and Tom. So next on the agenda is municipally promoted farmers markets for shellfish. Jeff, are you taking that?
I am.
Okay.
I'm going to just go through a couple of slides here quickly, and then ask Nancy if she can talk about Wellfleet's experience with their shellfish farmers markets. So let me share my screen quickly. So our initial guidance to try to help communities, Wellfleet came to us and said, "Gee, we'd like to do this. This is important for us. It's important for our industry." Farmers markets, it's sale of shellfish at farmers markets has been allowed for probably 10 years now. I think it probably predates maybe Vibrio. I think it went back to 2010, thereabouts. Might have even been earlier than that, but we first started getting our act together with DPH on how this could happen. And so it's this shellfish, this particular issue came to us last spring. And like I said, Wellfleet wanted the ability to try to do some kind of direct marketing, and we wanted to work within the existing regulations. So what we're asking for is that the municipality develop an operations plan for conducting this sale of shellfish, and submit it to DMF and the local Board of Health, and we'll go through it. We'll work with you and approve it, and then ultimately you'll get a DMF permit, our retail farmers market permit issued by DMF. And then you'll also need, the wholesale dealer will need a temporary food establishment permit issued by the local Board of Health, based on the operations plan. So all the highlights here from, and I'm quoting Nancy's plan, participating harvesters and growers bring their shellfish to the wholesale shellfish dealer prior to the date and the time of the market. that primary transaction is then conducted between the grower or the harvester and that wholesale dealer. The licensed wholesale dealer is responsible for all reporting and paperwork. There has to be, in the operations plan, there has to be a site designated. On the day of the market, the wholesale dealer will then transport that product back to the site in their refrigerated truck. It's technically all sales to the public are being executed by the wholesale dealer, consistent with all our DMF and DPH policies, regulations and policies. It has the feel of a buy direct. You can, in the case of Wellfleet, you can say, gee, I want to buy from Dan McKernan, and those are the oysters you're going to get are from that particular grower. It just happens to go through kind of invisibly to the consumer. It goes through the wholesale dealer. So we like the idea, and I think that the town likes the idea of orders placed ahead of time, and then nothing has to be dealt with after the fact. You don't have to either go back to resubmergence for the growers or have to deal with wild harvest product that hasn't been sold. So Nancy, are you able to talk about what's gone on in Wellfleet for the last, 15 weeks, 14 weeks?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Can.
Okay, hold on. I'm just going to call up the stats. I forgot one little stat to call up. But hold on one second. Where's my? Okay, so this really was kind of a community project, and I worked very closely, not only obviously with DMF and DPH, which to come up with an idea that would work, as Jeff said, within current regulations, but a little outside of the box. And so I think the thing that made it successful was the shellfishing community in general, and the good fortune that Wellfleet has to have the Wellfleet Shellfishermen's Association, which is a nonprofit industry group here. And they came to the table and made it much, much easier than it would have been otherwise. When I had this idea, I was really looking at what had happened in the scallop fishery, where boats were being permitted to sell direct to consumer from their boats, and the lines that were forming, and all the promotion on Facebook and social media that the scallopers were doing, and they just got these wonderful audiences, repeat customers. So I was thinking that each of our shellfishermen would have to do the same thing. And it's hard. It's a tall order for a shellfisherman or even a dealer to invest the time and resources to create a following. And that's where the Wellfleet Shellfishermen's Association just shone bright. And they basically set up a website on their website, which allowed like a one-stop shop. So they created profiles for each of the participants, and the photos of them at work, photos of them with their families, and then they created even generic categories, so that basically what happens is we have a bunch of return customers that keep trying different people's product. Sometimes you'll find them trying, a bag of wild quahogs and a bag of farm quahogs, or a bag of wild oysters and farmed oysters, and different areas of the harbor. So it's been a great educational opportunity for local customers to really explore all that Wellfleet has to offer from its different embayments. We also had a dealer that, came to the table with a ton of goodwill. It was just something brand new, and we could not have done it without the dealer, making just a very small amount of processing fee. And that's about it, and they've just been wonderful to work with, great lines of communication. And as I said, lots of goodwill. The other thing that has really helped us is it became instantly a big deal. And the first 2 weeks we were doing it at the near side of our pier, and the line was going all the way down Kendrick Avenue to Mayo Beach. So, within our first 2 markets, we were already creating traffic problems. So we moved it down the end of the pier, and we kind of set up an area with volunteers from the local high school green club. And they're like set up first, and they give people directions of what's going to happen when they get up to the actual dealer truck. We in Wellfleet is fortunate in having wild reproduction of oysters in our harbor. So we already get sea clam shells to put down as mulch in our harbor. So we have started a recycling program, and we overwinter these oysters and clam shells. We collect them each week, and then we overwinter them at our transfer station for use next year. We're recycling the bags so that we disinfect them at the dealer's doing this as well, disinfecting them at his facility, and then giving them back to the tag. The grower or harvester tags stay on the bags that go to the consumer, and they come back, and then you can disinfect them and give them back to their grower, because they're not getting that, they're not stuffed with a bushel or a half bushel of product. They've got 25 oysters or 24 clams in them. So, they really can be reused a couple of times. And this came from our customers asking if we could start recycling. So we do that, and then we give out recipes for the different product to try and encourage people, especially with oysters, to cook with them. Everybody is used to cooking with quahogs, but they're not used to cooking with oysters. So we've really been pushing that so people can think about oysters as more than just a raw bar. And so we've even had, I'd say, we from time to time we get scallops from local Wellfleet fishermen, sea scallops that fish out of P-Town. That it actually doesn't detract from people buying the other product. It kind of is incentive to come and buy more. And then we've created a new category, which we started out calling big uglies, because a lot of farmers had a lot of overgrown oysters on their beds, on their farms. And then recently, some of the farmers instead call them big beauties. So we're able to get rid of that product that's no longer, it's gone past the raw bar select size. And people are loving it. They get 30 instead of 25 for $20. And they can cook with them, they're perfect to fry or put in chowder or something. So we've kind of created a new product category, and even, big ugly oysters are getting acceptance in our customer base. And as I said, we've had a couple of dips, as you can imagine, in the middle of winter, but I don't think we've ever dipped below 100 orders. By the end of February, I believe we had, I think, 13 markets and 600 odd sales, 684, I think, sales, most of which were returning customers, and brought $40,000, more than $40,000 into our community. We opened on December 12th, and those were the numbers through the end of February. We've involved about 24 different harvesters, almost 24 different harvesters, both farmers and wild harvesters. We've really had no problem with product getting left over. I don't know that we've done even one resubmergence. The stuff, we're very, I'm very fortunate because the Shellfishermen's Association and one of our select board members, Ryan Curley, actually, they're so on top of it that they are coordinating and just looking what's happening on the website, and then letting the harvesters know exactly how much product so that we sell out every time. And then my team and I are on the flats. We know exactly, there's communication between us. So we know exactly who's harvesting for the market. We see them out there, we document it. We check the tags in the truck at the beginning of the market. And, I've been really chipping in the whole time too, but we hope to grow this in such a way that it's something that, the Shellfishermen's Association itself as a nonprofit could take over and run. And the town would step back and just continue to do its enforcement responsibilities. And I'm happy to help anybody who is interested. I'll share anything, because the goodwill in our community and the support for local shell fishermen and their families has been just really moving. And everybody leaves just with a huge smile on their faces, both the general public that come, but all the shell fishermen. The shell fishermen come and hand out their product for those 2 hours on Saturdays. And you just leave on a high because people love the product, and they just have rave reviews. So it's been something that in a pretty dire, dark time going into winter, we were able to turn around and add a lot of positivity to our community. And the ripple effect has gone, up into Boston and beyond. We do have people from New Bedford and Shrewsbury and Plymouth coming. So, there's room for more of these markets, I am absolutely sure. And we're willing to help anybody who's interested in getting one started.
Thanks, Nancy. I was going to ask you if you'd be willing to offer your advice, and much appreciated.
Here to help.
Great job, Nancy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy.
All right. Next is the update on the phone app to determine classification status of designated shellfish growing areas. I think that's Greg Betancourt's presentation.
Hello, everyone. How are you doing? I presented this back at MSOA in December, so if you've seen it before, bear with me. But I've been working on this to, for now, supplement, but hopefully to replace our static PDF maps of our classification areas that we have on our website. So on mass.gov, the website you all know and love, what we currently have is just those static links to the individual growing area classifications. So let's just pick the first one. You guys, I'm sure, recognize this. It's just growing area by growing area. And now what I've developed with our GIS team and IT is a interactive web map that will display eventually classifications. There they go. And a bunch more information. It's really going to be a useful tool for harvesters, enforcement, general public, on a more statewide level, instead of just having to click growing area by growing area to find out what these areas look like. You can zoom in and find out what the area is called. Eventually, we're going to get this tool to report real-time open or closed status. So a harvester can know if they can go in there. An enforcement agent can know what is open or closed. Eventually, there's going to be a link to a file sharing service, so that it won't be a legal definition link. It'll say something else, and that'll open up a page where we'll display all the recent legal notices that we've issued regarding these areas. And on that front, I just learned, not yesterday, but Friday, that we've got that file service sort of, at least identified. And now I'm waiting for IT to set up what they call an S3 bucket. I'm not sure of these technical terms, so don't ask me questions about them. But on the first project, once they discover the provisioning setup and what client to use to actually upload those notices onto the file hosting service. So I'm excited about that. That's a big jump forward in the timeline of when we can actually push this service live. It's been a dear product of mine for a while, and I think it's going to be a real useful tool. Comments during that MSOA meeting in December were pretty positive. I got some input about including relay and propagation areas. So far, I've collected about 30 of those to integrate into the map, and I really want this to be the best public forward-facing tool that DMF can offer for everyone. I had to slide so windows out of my way. I want to see what I'm doing. So there's also this drop-down table that'll get you more information instead of just clicking on an area and seeing that pop-up window display on the map. My internet is slow, I apologize. But anyway, these fields will be populated by their respective data, depending on how you zoom in or otherwise filter the map. So with that, I will take any questions.
I'm not seeing any hands.
Okay. Thanks, Greg. Looking forward to that as a finished product someday, soon.
Yes, it looks like it's moving faster than I anticipated, so that's good.
Great. Yeah, no, there's a real need for that. Thank you. So I guess the next on the agenda would be other business, if we're still working off same agenda. Is there any other business among the panel members?
I'm not seeing any hands.
All right. We can take public comment from the attendees at this time if there's anything people want to bring up that they haven't been able to during the meeting.
Not seeing any hands. Oh, we have one. Suzanne Phillips.
Okay.
You can unmute yourself.
Good afternoon. I just have a question going back to the makeup of this Shellfish Advisory Panel. And on a couple of the charts of the proposed members, when it was talking about wild harvesters and aquaculturists, there was in parentheses a limit on the number of dealers. And like with wild harvesters, I think it was no more than one dealer, and for aquaculturists, no more than two. I could be wrong in the details, but on the chart that you showed today, there was no mention of that. And I'm just wondering what is the thinking at this time on that issue? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. We did get some comments about aquaculturists that were dealers. Some who commented on that concept felt that those aquaculturists who were dealers were a different scale of aquaculturist. So at this, I mean, I don't want to tie the hands of whoever's appointing this group. I'm not sure I share that same concern, since a lot of our aquaculturists start out small, but as they refine their businesses and they invest in more so they can do the direct sale, they simply become wholesale dealers at some really small scale level. So I didn't feel the need to specify that in this list, but I'm sensitive to that. And of course, if you add up all of the appointees on this bulleted list, you come up one shy. So I was leaving one an extra person in case there was a real need to bring somebody into this panel who didn't, or from some sector that felt underrepresented. So, but anyway, so that I understand the issue you're bringing up, and that was the nature of it, is that if we're going to have aquaculturists and dealers, let's make sure we have some small scale aquaculturists as well. I think that was the driving point. Does that make sense to you?
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I would advocate maybe have a larger person and smaller. I think there's a real difference between the small aquaculturists, like some of the guys we have at my end of the Cape, who get a wholesale permit but are not really a big business. That's all, just to include them.
Yeah.
And I wonder if there's even a need with the wild harvesters. I can't even think of a wild harvester who's also got a wholesale permit. Except maybe one guy who's trying to turn his shed into a little place so he can do scallops, but it's very minimal. Thank you very much,
Yeah.
Director.
Okay, Suzanne, thanks.
Dan, I'm
Sorry.
not seeing any other hands.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank everybody for participating in this meeting today. It went a little longer than scheduled, but it's still pretty reasonable at just 15 minutes over, and we all have a very short ride home after this meeting to where we're going. So thanks for your continued participation. I do want to note that that while many of our panelists weren't on the beginning of the call, almost all of them did wind up joining the call eventually. I think I'm counting 10 members present. So I really want to thank everybody for their input. And I really think that the Shellfish program benefits from this kind of public airing and sharing of information that goes a long way to not only adding credibility to the program, but helping the public appreciate the work and the challenges that the folks on the Shellfish program have. So I want to credit those on the program, all the staff who participated, but also you all for having this ongoing and strong interest in all that we do. So with that, thank you. Have a great day, and we'll be following up with more. And if anybody wants to attend tomorrow's Mass Shellfish Initiative Task Force meeting, I believe it's at 1 o'clock. And we're going to put the finishing touches on the strategic plan. So see you then. Thank you, everyone.